Today I'm going to walk through editing this photo of Langden Cliffs near Dover that I took on the weekend. What I'm going to do is at each step in the process I will create a new virtual copy, and then we can check each step and clearly see what changes we've made from one step to the next. Firstly, I'm going to sort out, I think there's a slight angle I need to, of the horizon, slight angle of the horizon I need to address and change the crop. With the crop I want to bring the top down so that we're really tight into this crest of the hill here, so that it's really bringing the attention to the cliffs and the sea, which is the main focus of this photo. So first step is to create a virtual copy. I'm not going to use this to fix the angle in the crop tool because it doesn't allow you to zoom in. I find this quite awkward to use for fine adjustments like this. Oh, look, that's annoying. Let's get rid of that. And so I use the transform controls because this allows me to zoom right in so I can clearly see I'm going to be checking the horizon that side and that side. And then when you use the rotate, it puts this grid over the top, which makes it a bit easier to see. So it's not a big adjustment. I don't know how well this is coming out, but I can just see, there we go, that's pretty much flat now. And I'm just looking at the very far left, very far right. I can see we're just a few pixels above that grid line, so the horizon's now flat. And then zoom back out. Right, and I can see what I need to do is you need to hit constrain crop here because it hasn't done that. There we go. Now we're zoomed in slightly to get rid of those edges. Okay, and then the crop. I'm going to go for a 4:5 crop because that should get me, yeah, just in. Might bring that up slightly. So yeah, we're now tight into just the cliffs and the sea. So that's the first step. And just to check from step 1 to step 2, so that was the original, completely unedited, and then now we've got our crop, a slight rotation, and that's our final composition, I think. On to the next step. I'm going to adjust the profile, the exposure, the highlights, and have a look at setting the sort of overall brightness of the image as a starting point. So create a virtual copy. I'm going to change the profile. I mostly use a linear profile as a starting point. This gives me the most control over the editing process. It's the most sort of neutral starting point. So I'm going to change to that. Immediately the image is looking far more dull and flat and darker, so we need to start bringing in more colours, more contrast. So I'm going to bring the exposure up, and what I want to make sure I'm doing is preserving the detail in these cliffs. And it seems slightly counterintuitive maybe, but I'm actually going to bring the highlights down, which at first seems like it's lowering the contrast. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the top point of the tone curve, keeping an eye, make sure it doesn't clip in the histogram. If I go too far, then we're starting to clip. So I really want to keep it just above to preserve as much detail as possible. And what I will do is I will show why bringing the highlights down has helped keep these details, or how it has helped keep these details. So if I create another virtual copy, and then with this one, I'm going to put the highlights back to neutral. I then need to bring this tone curve back up to preserve the highlights, to stop it clipping. And then if I flip between these two virtual copies, if you keep an eye on, say, this section here, I'm going to go back to the previous one, and we've got a bit more detail in there, that's what I want, as much detail as possible in those white cliffs. And there you can see slightly lower contrast in the highlights. So let's just undo that and undo creating that fourth virtual copy. Okay, there we go. Now we're going to look at making some color adjustments. Create a new virtual copy for this next step. And I mostly use the color controls in the calibration section in terms of setting the saturation of the overall image rather than just the one saturation or one vibrance slider. So I'm just going to go through each of these in turn, move the slider around until it's starting to have an effect but not go too crazy with it. Move to the green. I'm mostly keeping an eye on the landscape here, not the sky. I'm well aware that sky is looking pretty terrible, very unrealistic. And then lastly, the red channel. Yeah, we can push that quite a bit. There we go. So that's that. And yeah, that sky's looking a little bit weird. I definitely don't want that much blue there. So I am going to come up to the hue, saturation and luminance. Very simply, I'm just going to select this point and just bring the saturation of the blue down so that it's sort of equal to the sea in terms of saturation for now. Okay, and that's probably all I'm going to do with the colours at this current step. So let's look at a before and after of this step. So very flat in terms of colour, and then we're bringing a bit more colour out there. Might do more later, but for now that'll do. The image is still looking quite flat, lacking in a lot of contrast. So I think what I'm going to do is, I will make a slight adjustment with the tone curve. So let's create a new virtual copy. And this is just going to be slight, but if I bring those shadows down slightly, that's immediately bringing a bit more depth to the image. And let's increase the highlights just a little bit. Again, being super careful to preserve all this detail in the cliff. Okay, so before that, quite flat, and then that's just adding a little bit more there. So next I want to continue adding contrast, and I'm going to work more with the sort of shadow tones, the dark tones. And what I'm going to do is use the shadow and black sliders to work on the contrast within those shadow tones. So we'll create another virtual copy, and I'm going to do this by bringing the blacks down. In fact, that's making that's really good. I don't mind the blacks clipping so much. I don't want to go super dark and lose loads of information, but let's bring that down. Yeah, maybe to about there. Do I even need to bring this back up? Maybe to about there. And then with just those two sliders, we've created a bit more contrast in the shadow tones. Let's see another change there. So if we go back through the last two steps from that, so we added the tone curve and then some contrast in the shadows. Next, I'm going to work on the sea, adding a bit of clarity, probably maybe another tone curve adjustment to get a bit more contrast in there. We've got a bit. There's some interesting slight shadows and some highlights, so let's see what we can do with that. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to use masking, create a mask for the sea, and adjust that. So, and there's going to be a couple of stages to this, so let's create a virtual copy. And what I'm going to do is, I think I'm going to create a linear gradient. So from about here up to here, because I want to affect the sea nearer the camera, so it's less of an effect further away. Let's call this the sea. But obviously we've got lots of land included in with this, which I want to exclude. So I'm going to intersect this mask with the brush, and I'm going to erase. I don't know why this mine always defaults to the erase one being inverted, so it's adding to the mask. So turn off that invert, and then now we're erasing, and I'm going to erase from this mask. So hopefully this will work. So, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go around the edge of the cliff. I'm going to have it on auto mask, and I am hoping it's going to know that this is the edge of something to and then erase the edge of it, but not erase the mask over the sea. So let's try that. It doesn't matter too much if there's a little bit of overlap, but let's see what we get. And if I stop there, and now in fact I'm going to turn off auto mask and then finish the rest. Okay, so let's see, now I want to, I think I'm gonna, let's see what clarity does to that mask. Yeah, that's definitely adding a bit more interest. I might see if I can use the curves to pull down some of the shadows even more. And yeah, so let's look at a before that mask. And then with that mask, yeah, I quite like that. That's definitely added a bit more interest to the sea. I'm actually tempted to go a bit further with it, so let's have a look. Let's select the mask again, and bring this tone curve down even more. To about there. Yeah, I don't think that looks too extreme or too unrealistic. Now I'm going to add another mask, and what I want to do is use another linear gradient mask from the top down this time, and we're going to introduce a little bit of haze to the distant part of the landscape, just to try and emphasize that the depth of the image from the foreground to the background. So, okay, let's create a new virtual copy. There we go. And create a new mask, which will be a linear gradient from the top down. I think I'm going to be really subtle with this. I might get it to about that size. Let's see it. But then I'm going to move it up, so it's only a very slight effect, something like that. And then let's call that Haze. And I think for this, I will probably, let's use the dehaze and see what that does. That's probably too much. Just a little bit. I might even reduce the clarity and even the texture. Let's go full on with that. I'm going to bring that down a bit more. Okay, so let's look at a before and after with that. Yeah, that's certainly helped a little bit. I might move that back up actually. Okay, let's look at before and after. What I don't want it to do is change the sort of cliff face too much. Okay, which I think it is doing, so yeah, slight change of plan. Let's make it a lot smaller. And something like that. So a very minor adjustment. In fact, I'll do the before and after from here. Yeah, it's just affecting the top of the cliff face there and the sky. I'm going to add one more mask. Well, only one more, I think. So let's create a virtual copy. And what I want to do is I'm going to create a mask in the bottom left-hand corner once it loads. Come on. There we go. In the bottom left-hand corner to reduce the exposure here and help draw the viewer's eye into the center of the image, which is where I want the main focus to be. So now we're going to create a linear gradient. I'm going to try and not adjust the cliff face too much. Let's try that. And then probably through various things, let's bring the exposure down. Maybe bring the shadows down. And then maybe use the tone curve. I think I need to move the mask a bit. Where are we? To about there. And then how's that looking? Yeah, that's not too bad. Maybe let's bring the shadows up ever so slightly. Okay, and I think another thing I'm going to do is I am going to come out of the mask, and I'm going to increase the overall contrast as well using the tone curve. It's still looking slightly flat here, so need to plug in. Bring it down a bit more, something like that. And I might even try and adjust the colours a bit more. Maybe I will just pick out the greens and adjust those. So let's find those. Let's look at the saturation. I'll pick some in this sort of mid-green colour. Let's see what we can do. Yeah, something like that, just add a bit more. Or is that too much? That's too much. Let's undo that and go again, but not so much. Something like that. So then if we do a comparison between the previous step and this step, so we've got a bit more overall contrast and darkened down this foreground. I also want to, I think I'm going to try and increase the contrast a bit in the shadows here. These are it's looking a little bit flat, so I might even zoom in a bit here. See what we can do. Wonder if I can work with these shadows and black controls more. What happens if I bring that up a bit? And then bring the blacks down. No, that doesn't work. Okay, so maybe in our mask, what can I do here? Let's try and bring this curve down a bit more. And I might just bring this down so we're only editing the shadows. Yeah, I think that looks a bit better. I've got a bit more contrast in them now. So for a last step, I think I'm going to have a go at maybe seeing if we can get a bit of detail out of the cliff face, maybe add a bit of texture, and maybe brighten up the brightest parts as well. So what I'm going to do is I am going to create another mask. I'll tell you what, okay, first step, create a virtual copy. God, it's really struggling with those. And then let's name that one bottom left, nice and descriptive. And then let's do luminance range. And I'm just going to click a point here as a start. And let's see what that's got. Okay, so that's got all of the cliff face and some of the other highlights in the image. So I'm just going to go through and let's call that cliff face. I'm going to subtract from that mask and let's get rid of some of these bits that we don't want. Okay, we've got our mask of our cliff face now. So I'm just going to see if I can get a bit of texture out of this. Let's zoom in. Just want to get a bit more out of the cliff face. So we select the mask. I'm probably going to use a few controls. I might try the clarity. Yeah, it's making a subtle difference. That's quite good. And then use texture as well. Yeah, I think I can push both of them quite far. What if I use the dehaze? Let's have a look at this. So that's actually, I quite like the effect in terms of the contrast that's bringing in, but it's adding a lot of colour that I don't want to see there. So I might use that and then desaturate this as well. Yeah, that's looking good. So without the mask and with, you can see it's added a lot more texture. We're seeing a lot of detail in the cliff face. Okay. Let's zoom out and see that. Yep, I like that. That's good. And I think the final step for this photo is I want to add a bit more colour to the sea. I think with all the work on the land, the texture and the colour of the sea, we've lost a bit of that. So let's go back to our sea mask. And I'm going to do what I said I don't normally do, which is use the saturation slider. And just see if we can add a bit more. Is that too much? Maybe, yeah. Let's bring it back a little bit. So that's, yeah, it's a bit more turquoise and green. It's quite interesting colour to the sea there. So I think the last thing to do is to look through at the steps we've made from the beginning until the end. So this is how we started. And then here's the crop. And I changed the profile, the highlights, added a bit of colour, and started to add a bit of contrast with the curves. I think then I started looking at the shadows, adjusted the blacks and the shadow tones, and then started to work on some masks. That was the sea. And then I think this is going to be the hazy mask at the top. And then our mask in the bottom left to darken that down. And then the last step was to mask the cliffs, add some more texture there, and adjust the colour of the sea.